No one will choose you over me. Until the billionaire stopped the wedding to crown the maid. Hey, stop scrolling for a second, because what you're about to hear happened in a church, in front of 300 people, on the happiest day of a rich family's life, and it ended with a maid wearing a crown. Nobody in that room was ready for it. Not the bride, not the guests, not even the groom's own father. Everyone thought they knew how this wedding would end. They were completely wrong. Stay with me, this gets unbelievable. Welcome back, friend. I'm so glad you clicked on this one, because today's story is one of those rare, true-to-life kind of tales that reminds you love doesn't care about money, titles, or last names. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Now settle in, because this story starts quiet, almost boring, and ends in a way that will stay with you long after the video's over. Nobody in Ashefield Manor ever paid attention to the girl who dusted the picture frames. Her name was Naomi Carter, 26 years old, and she had worked as a housemaid for the Whitmore family for almost 4 years. She woke up at 5 a.m. every morning in the small staff quarters behind the main house, ironed her pink and white uniform, and moved through the enormous mansion like a ghost, seen by everyone, noticed by no one. The Whitmores were old money. Real estate, hotels, a shipping empire that stretched from Boston to Singapore. Richard Whitmore, the family patriarch, ran the empire with a cold precision that made grown executives nervous in boardrooms. His son, Daniel Whitmore, was the golden heir, 31 years old, sharp-jawed, quiet, the kind of man magazines called unreachable. Daniel had grown up with drivers and private tutors and had never, not once in his life, had to make his own bed. Naomi had made that bed every single day for 4 years. At first, it was just chores. Then it became something else, small moments neither of them planned. Daniel would come home late from the office, exhausted, and find a cup of tea already waiting outside his study door, steeped exactly the way he liked it, though he never told anyone how he liked it. He started noticing. She always left one lamp on for him in the hallway, so he wouldn't stumble in the dark. She remembered his mother's birthday, the mother who had passed away when Daniel was 19, and every year, quietly, she'd place a single white lily on the windowsill of his study without saying a word. Nobody taught her to do that. She just paid attention. That was who Naomi was. Daniel started finding reasons to walk past the kitchen in the mornings. Meanwhile, upstairs, in the part of the house Naomi was never allowed to linger in, Richard Whitmore had already chosen his son's future. Her name was Vanessa Sinclair, daughter of a senator, raised in Manhattan, groomed since childhood for exactly this kind of marriage. Vanessa was beautiful in the way magazine covers are beautiful. Poised. Calculated. Every smile measured for effect. She'll be perfect for the company, Richard told Daniel over dinner one night, sliding a folder across the table like it was a business acquisition. The Sinclair name opens doors we can't open ourselves. Daniel didn't argue. That was the tragedy of his life. He never argued. Not with his father, not with the board, not with the version of his future that had been decided for him since he was in diapers. He agreed to the engagement the way a man agrees to a merger. Numbly, politely, distantly. But something had already shifted in him. Something small. A quiet ache he couldn't name yet. One evening, 3 weeks before the engagement dinner, a storm rolled through the estate. Power lines went down. The generator failed. The entire mansion sat in pitch darkness except for one flickering candle in the kitchen, where Naomi sat alone, humming softly to herself while she folded linens by hand because the machines had stopped. Daniel found her there. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood in the doorway, watching her hum an old, unfamiliar tune, her hands moving with quiet grace over the fabric. She looked up and startled, quickly standing, apologizing for being in his way. "Don't," he said softly. "Don't apologize. It's nice having someone actually here." They talked for almost 2 hours that night, by candlelight, about nothing important. Her childhood in a small town in Ohio, her mother who raised 4 kids alone after her father left, her dream of one day opening a little bakery with yellow curtains and a bell on the door. Daniel listened the way no one had ever listened to him before, like her small dreams actually mattered. When the lights came back on, something in the room had changed. Neither of them said it out loud, but it was there. The kitchen was warm again, but Daniel didn't want to leave. She never asked for anything. That was exactly the problem. In the weeks that followed the storm, Daniel found himself inventing reasons to be near Naomi. He'd request tea when he wasn't thirsty. He'd forget his jacket in the kitchen. He started arriving home earlier. Not for meetings, not for his father, but for the 10 quiet minutes he might catch with a girl who wasn't supposed to matter to him at all. Naomi noticed too, though she told herself constantly that it meant nothing. Men like Daniel Whitmore didn't fall for women like her. This was a fantasy she couldn't afford, not with her mother's medical bills back in Ohio, not with a job that was the only thing standing between her family and real hardship. She kept her heart locked, even as it kept trying the door. Meanwhile, Vanessa Sinclair had moved into the guest wing to help plan the wedding, though most of her time was spent giving orders to staff and making pointed comments about the help. She was polished, cold, and deeply observant, the kind of woman who noticed things before anyone confirmed them out loud. She noticed the way Daniel's eyes drifted toward the kitchen doorway during dinner. She noticed the fresh lily on the study windowsill that she hadn't ordered. She noticed Naomi's hands trembling slightly whenever Daniel walked into a room. Vanessa said nothing. She simply began watching more closely, filing away every detail like ammunition. Then came the night that changed everything. It was Richard Whitmore's birthday, and the family threw a formal dinner in the grand hall, crystal chandeliers, string quartet, family friends from 3 different states. Naomi was assigned to serve the head table, an assignment she dreaded, knowing she'd have to stand close to Daniel and Vanessa all evening while pretending her heart wasn't cracking quietly down the middle. Halfway through dinner, disaster struck. An elderly guest, Richard's old business partner, suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed at the table. Panic erupted. Guests screamed. Vanessa froze completely, her manicured hands pressed to her mouth, doing nothing. Naomi didn't freeze. She dropped the serving tray, rushed to the man's side, tilted his head back, and began CPR. Steady, practiced, calm. It turned out that back in Ohio, she'd spent 2 years working as a home health aide before coming to Ashefield Manor, and she knew exactly what to do. She counted compressions under her breath while the room around her spiraled into chaos, until the paramedics arrived 7 agonizing minutes later and took over. The man survived. Later, doctors would say that if she'd waited even 2 more minutes, he wouldn't have. The entire dining hall stood in stunned silence, staring at the maid who had just saved a man's life while the future daughter-in-law had stood there, useless, in her $4,000 dress. Richard Whitmore, shaken and grateful, walked over to Naomi afterward and took both her hands in his. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion his family rarely saw. "You saved my oldest friend's life." Daniel didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just stood there, watching this woman, his father's employee, invisible to the entire world, become the strongest, most remarkable person in the room. That night, Vanessa cornered Naomi in the hallway outside the kitchen. "Cute little performance," she said coldly, arms crossed. "But don't get any ideas. You clean toilets in this house. You will always clean toilets in this house. Daniel is marrying me in 6 weeks, and after that, you will not exist to this family. Do you understand?" Naomi lowered her eyes, the old instinct of survival kicking in. "Yes, ma'am." But something inside her had shifted that night too. Not romantic hope, something deeper. A quiet refusal to shrink any longer. She didn't know yet that 6 weeks would not go the way Vanessa planned. She didn't know that Daniel, standing frozen in that dining hall, had just made a decision he hadn't told anyone yet, not even himself, fully. What Daniel discovered that week would blow the entire wedding apart. 2 days after the birthday dinner, Daniel found himself unable to stop thinking about the way Naomi's hands hadn't shaken once during the emergency. Steady, sure, brave, while Vanessa had simply watched. He told himself it meant nothing. Character under pressure. That was all. But then something else happened, something he never expected. Daniel had taken over more of his father's business dealings that year, including quiet oversight of Senator Sinclair's finances, a courtesy extended between soon-to-be family. Late one night, reviewing documents in his study, he found something buried in a folder that shouldn't have been on his desk at all. A series of wire transfers from Vanessa's personal account to a real estate holding company, one that, after some digging, turned out to be secretly owned by Vanessa's brother. The company was being used to funnel Whitmore shipping contracts to a shell corporation, skimming nearly 11% off every deal quietly over the past 2 years. 2 years, meaning it had started long before the engagement was ever announced. Meaning Vanessa's family hadn't wanted a marriage. They'd wanted access. Daniel sat in his study until 3 a.m. that night, staring at numbers that confirmed what his gut had been whispering for months. This engagement was never about love. It was never even about ambition, exactly. It was theft, dressed up in white lace. He didn't confront anyone yet. He needed proof. Real proof, not suspicion, because accusing a senator's daughter without an airtight case could destroy the Whitmore name overnight. While Daniel quietly built his case over the following days, Naomi's world was unraveling in a different way. Her mother's medical bills back in Ohio had spiked unexpectedly, a second surgery, unplanned, expensive. Naomi sat in the small staff quarters that night doing math on a crumpled receipt, trying to figure out how she'd send enough money home this month. She didn't tell anyone. She never told anyone. That was Naomi's way. Carry it alone, smile anyway, keep going. But Daniel noticed the shadows under her eyes. He noticed her hands shaking now, not from bravery, but from exhaustion and fear. And when he gently asked what was wrong, she finally broke, just slightly, admitting the truth about her mother. Without a second thought, Daniel quietly arranged for the surgery to be covered, anonymously, through a hospital foundation, so she'd never know it came from him and never feel indebted. It wasn't about buying her gratitude. It was the first purely selfless thing he'd ever done in his life that had nothing to do with a family business. That same week, Richard Whitmore called Daniel into his office. The old man looked tired, older than Daniel had ever seen him. "I need to tell you something," Richard said slowly. "Before the wedding. About your mother." Daniel frowned. "What about her?" Richard's hands trembled slightly as he opened an old drawer and pulled out a faded photograph, a young woman in a simple dress, standing in front of a small bakery with yellow curtains. "Your mother," Richard said quietly, "came from nothing. Her family had less than the girl who cleans our floors now. I married her anyway, against everyone's wishes, and it was the best decision of my life. I built all of this," he gestured around the mansion, "to prove something to people who never deserved to be proven right. And somewhere along the way, I forgot the only thing that actually mattered." He looked directly at his son. "I've watched you this month, Daniel. I know where your eyes go at dinner. I know whose lily is on your windowsill. I'm not going to pretend I don't see it." Daniel's chest tightened. "Dad, I'm not finished," Richard said, holding up a hand. "I also know something you don't yet. About Vanessa's family." He slid a folder across the desk. The same shell company, the same wire transfers, uncovered independently by Richard's own private investigators weeks earlier. Father and son sat in stunned silence, staring at proof that the wedding 6 days away was built entirely on a lie. "The question now," Richard said quietly, "is what you're going to do about it. And who you're actually going to choose." Outside the study door, unseen by either of them, Naomi walked past carrying a stack of fresh linens, completely unaware that in 6 days, her entire life was about to change forever. 6 days. That's all the time Daniel had left to decide his entire future. He spent that first sleepless night pacing his study, staring at the folder of evidence, staring at the old photograph of his mother in front of that little bakery. He thought about his father's words, the only thing that actually mattered, and for the first time in his adult life, Daniel Whitmore understood what regret would feel like if he let this moment slip away. But it wasn't simple. Exposing Vanessa's family publicly, days before the wedding, would trigger a scandal that could tank Whitmore shipping stock, drag the Sinclair name through federal investigation, and expose his own father's business dealings to unwanted scrutiny. Richard advised patience. Gather full documentation. Involve the lawyers quietly. Handle it the right way, not the reckless way. Daniel agreed. On the surface, he agreed. But his heart had already made a decision his mind hadn't caught up to yet. 3 days before the wedding, Vanessa sensed something had shifted. Daniel had grown distant, distracted, cold in a way that unsettled her calculated confidence. She cornered him in the East Wing hallway, her voice sharp. "What's going on with you?" she demanded. "You've barely looked at me all week." "Wedding stress," Daniel said flatly, though the lie tasted bitter in his mouth. Vanessa studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. "This is about the maid, isn't it?" "Don't insult me, Daniel. I've seen the way you look at her. It's pathetic, honestly, a Whitmore mooning over the help like some fairy tale. She's a paycheck to you, not a person. Don't confuse convenience for love." Something in Daniel snapped quietly at that moment, not with rage, but with clarity. He finally saw Vanessa completely. Not a partner, not even a person he particularly respected, just a carefully engineered arrangement wearing the mask of romance. "You're right about one thing," he said calmly. "I have been looking at her differently, because she's shown me more genuine character in 4 months than you've shown me in 4 years." Vanessa's face went pale with fury, but before she could respond, Daniel walked away. That same evening, Naomi received devastating news of her own. A letter arrived from Ohio. Her mother's recovery had hit complications, and though she was stable now thanks to the surgery Naomi still didn't know Daniel had funded, the letter mentioned a name that made Naomi's blood run cold. Anonymous donor, Whitmore Family Health Foundation. She sat on her narrow bed in the staff quarters, letter trembling in her hands, and finally understood. Daniel had paid for everything. Quietly, without ever mentioning a word. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified. Because now everything made a horrible kind of sense. The lingering looks, the late-night conversations, the tea outside his study door that he never asked her to stop making. And in 2 days, he was marrying someone else. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was heartbreak dressed up in kindness, and she had no idea how to survive watching him say, "I do," to another woman. She made a decision that night. She would ask for leave. She would go home to Ohio, be with her mother, and never come back to Ashefield Manor. It was the only way to protect what was left of her heart. She wrote her resignation letter with shaking hands and placed it on the kitchen counter, planning to deliver it to the house manager first thing in the morning. But morning came faster than she expected, and so did Daniel. He found her in the kitchen at 5:30 a.m., already in uniform, resignation letter in hand. Tears she'd tried to hide streaked down her face. "Naomi." His voice cracked with something raw. "What is this?" "I have to go home," she said, refusing to meet his eyes. "My mother needs me, and I know about the surgery, Daniel. I know it was you. I can't keep working here pretending I don't feel." She stopped herself, horrified at what she'd almost said. Daniel crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and gently took the letter from her trembling hands, setting it down on the counter. "Don't go," he said quietly. "Please. Give me 2 days. Just 2 days and everything is going to change. I promise you that." She searched his face, confused, terrified, hopeful despite every instinct telling her not to be. "Trust me," Daniel whispered. "This wedding is not what anyone thinks it is. And neither is my future." Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise over Ashefield Manor, the same sun that in 48 hours would rise over a wedding day that no one in that grand cathedral would ever forget. The morning of the wedding, 300 guests had no idea they were about to witness history. St. Augustine's Cathedral had been transformed into something out of a royal fairy tale. White orchids cascading down marble columns, a choir rehearsing softly in the loft, gold ribbon wound around every pew. Senator Sinclair walked the halls proudly, greeting donors and dignitaries, utterly unaware that his family's financial crimes now sat documented in a sealed envelope inside Richard Whitmore's breast pocket. Vanessa spent the morning at the estate getting ready with a team of stylists, radiant and triumphant, believing she'd won. She had no idea that her carefully built empire of lies was about to collapse in front of everyone she'd ever wanted to impress. Meanwhile, in the small staff quarters, Naomi stood frozen, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror. Daniel had asked her to trust him, but trust felt impossible when in a few hours she'd have to watch him marry another woman. She told herself she wouldn't go to the ceremony. She'd stay behind, finish packing her bags for Ohio, and leave before the reception even began. But something, she still couldn't explain what, pulled her toward the cathedral that morning instead. She told herself she just wanted to see the flowers she'd helped arrange one final time before she left this life behind forever. She slipped into the very back of the cathedral in her plain uniform, unnoticed among the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits, and took a seat in the last pew, half hidden behind a stone pillar. At exactly 2 p.m., the organ began to play. Vanessa walked down the aisle in a gown that cost more than most people's houses, veil trailing behind her like a cloud, every camera flashing. Senator Sinclair beamed with pride beside her. Richard Whitmore stood near the front, his jaw tight, the sealed envelope still resting against his chest like a held breath. Daniel stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit, his face unreadable to everyone in that room except, perhaps, his father. The priest began the ceremony. Vows were exchanged with practiced elegance on Vanessa's part, hollow formality on Daniel's. The room swelled with anticipation as the priest reached the final, fateful words. If anyone here has reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now, or forever hold your peace. Silence. 3 seconds passed. 5. 10. Then Daniel Whitmore spoke. I do, he said. A collective breath of relief moved through the crowd, until he continued. I do have a reason. Gasps rippled through the cathedral. Vanessa's face drained of color. The priest froze mid-motion, unsure whether to proceed. Daniel. Vanessa hissed under her breath, panic flashing in her eyes. What are you doing? Daniel turned, not to her, but to the crowd, his voice steady and clear enough to reach every corner of the cathedral. For the past 3 weeks, I've known something about this marriage that changes everything. I was going to handle it quietly, the way my family always handles things, behind closed doors, protecting reputations, protecting business. But standing here, right now, looking at every person in this room who came to witness something they believe is love, I can't lie to you anymore. And I can't lie to myself. Richard Whitmore stepped forward from the front pew, the sealed envelope now in his hand, and nodded once at his son, a silent permission. Daniel opened the envelope in front of the entire congregation. This wedding, he said, was never about love. It was about money my future wife's family has been secretly stealing from my company for 2 years, funneled through a shell corporation registered to her own brother. The cathedral erupted into chaos, gasps, whispers, Senator Sinclair rising to his feet in furious denial, Vanessa's face contorting from shock to rage to desperate pleading, all in the span of seconds. But Daniel wasn't finished. He set the envelope down on the altar, turned away from Vanessa completely, and began walking, not toward the exit, but down the aisle, past 300 stunned faces, toward the back pew where a girl in a plain pink and white maid's uniform sat frozen, tears already streaming down her face, wondering if she was dreaming. Every eye in that cathedral turned to watch a billionaire walk away from his own wedding, and straight toward the help. Naomi didn't move. She couldn't. Her heart pounded so violently she could hear it over the roaring murmur of 300 stunned guests. Daniel walked the entire length of that aisle, past his father's proud, tearful nod, past Vanessa's shattered scream of, "How dare you humiliate me like this?" Past the horrified faces of senators and CEOs and society wives who had never once, in their entire privileged lives, seen anything like this happen at a wedding, and he stopped directly in front of her. He knelt down, right there on the marble floor in his $3,000 suit, in front of everyone. "I told you 2 days ago that everything was going to change," he said, his voice trembling now, all the polished composure gone. "I meant it. I don't want a wedding built on lies and stolen money and a name that looks good in a press release. I want a life built on someone who held a dying man's heart together with her bare hands while everyone else just watched. I want someone who left a flower on my mother's windowsill every year without ever telling me why. I want you, Naomi. Not because you're convenient, because you're the realest thing that has ever walked into my life. The cathedral had gone utterly silent, 300 people holding their breath at once. Naomi's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming freely now.
Daniel, I'm nobody.
I clean your floors. I can't. You're not nobody, Daniel said fiercely. You never were. The only people in this room who ever treated you like you were invisible are the same people who just watched their own greed get exposed in front of God and 300 witnesses. I don't care what anyone in here thinks anymore. I only care what you think. Behind them, chaos still churned. Senator Sinclair shouting threats about lawyers. Vanessa sobbing furiously as security quietly began escorting her family toward a side exit, guests whispering in a frenzy of shock and scandal. But in that small bubble at the back of the cathedral, none of it seemed to touch Daniel or Naomi at all. Richard Whitmore walked slowly down the aisle himself now, stopping beside his son. He looked down at Naomi with something like awe in his eyes, the same look he must have once given a girl from nothing, standing in front of a bakery with yellow curtains, decades ago. My wife used to say, Richard said softly, that the truest wealth in this world isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the character of the person standing beside you when everything else falls apart. He extended a hand to help Naomi to her feet. You showed this family more character in 4 months than most people show in a lifetime. I would be honored, genuinely honored, to call you my daughter. Naomi looked between father and son, completely overwhelmed, tears falling freely now, unable to form words. Then, from somewhere in the stunned crowd, an elderly voice called out, the very same business partner Naomi had saved with her own 2 hands weeks earlier. Let the girls speak, he shouted, rising unsteadily to his feet with the help of a cane. This woman saved my life while half of you just stood there in your fancy shoes. If Daniel Whitmore has any sense left in him, he'll marry her himself, right here, right now. A ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing, spreading through pockets of the crowd until it became a wave. Daniel took Naomi's trembling hands in his, kneeling once more, right there on the cathedral floor. I'm not asking you to replace anyone today, he said quietly, just for her. I'm asking you to be the beginning of something real. Whenever you're ready, however long it takes, I'll wait. Naomi looked down at this man, a billionaire, an heir to an empire, kneeling before her in front of the entire world he'd been born into, and for the first time in her life, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, love didn't check your last name before it chose you. What happened over the next few weeks would rewrite everything Ashefield Manor believed about class, love, and worth. The scandal, of course, exploded across every major outlet within 24 hours. Billionaire heir Halt's wedding to confess love for family Maid trended for 3 straight days. Photographers camped outside the estate gates. Senator Sinclair resigned amid a federal fraud investigation within the week, his political career collapsing as quietly and completely as his daughter's engagement had. Vanessa disappeared from public life entirely, moving to Europe to escape the humiliation that followed her name like a shadow. But inside Ashefield Manor, something far gentler was unfolding. Naomi didn't move into the main house right away. She insisted, stubbornly, on staying in the staff quarters for another 2 weeks, unwilling to accept anything that felt like it was being handed to her rather than earned. Daniel didn't push. Instead, he simply showed up, every evening, in the same kitchen where their story had quietly begun, bringing takeout instead of expecting her to cook, insisting on washing dishes himself while she laughed at how badly he did it. You've literally never washed a dish in your life, have you? She teased one night, watching him fumble with a sponge like it was foreign technology. In my defense, Daniel said, grinning in a way the tabloids had never once photographed, I've been busy running a shipping empire.
Sure.
Rinse the soap off before you stack it, billionaire boy. It was in these small, unglamorous moments, dish soap and takeout containers and easy laughter, that something real took root between them, far stronger than anything that had ever existed between Daniel and Vanessa. Richard Whitmore, meanwhile, began quietly courting Naomi's trust in his own way. He asked her one afternoon if she'd help him go through old boxes of his late wife's things, photographs, letters, the original recipe cards from that little bakery with the yellow curtains that had closed decades ago when his wife chose marriage over her dream. She always regretted closing it, Richard admitted, holding a faded recipe card with trembling hands. She used to say she gave up her whole identity to become Mrs. Whitmore. I promised myself, if I ever got another chance to make things right in this family, I would never let that happen to someone I love again. He looked at Naomi meaningfully. Whatever you decide to do with your life, Naomi, whether it's with my son or a bakery of your own or anything else, this family will support it. Not control it. Support it. Naomi's eyes filled with tears at those words. It was the first time in her adult life anyone with real power had ever offered her freedom instead of expectations. Word of what happened at the cathedral spread through Naomi's small hometown in Ohio, too. Her mother, recovering steadily from surgery, called her in tears one evening. "Baby, is it true? Is it really true what they're saying on the news?" "Which part, Mama?" Naomi laughed through her own tears. "All of it. The rich boy, the wedding, the crown they're saying he's going to give you." Naomi paused. "What crown, Mama?" Her mother read her a headline from a tabloid. Cinderella's story. Billionaire heir plans public proposal. Sources say ring will include family heirloom tiara. Naomi didn't know if it was true. She hadn't spoken to Daniel about anything so formal yet. They were still learning each other in the quiet, ordinary ways two people do after chaos settles. But something about hearing it out loud made her chest tighten with a feeling she hadn't let herself fully trust yet. Hope, real and unguarded. She didn't know that 3 floors above her, in his study, Daniel was sitting with a small velvet box that had belonged to his mother. And inside it, exactly as the tabloids had somehow guessed, sat a delicate antique tiara, small enough to be worn simply, meaningfully, not as a display of wealth, but as a promise passed down through generations of women who deserved to be chosen for who they were, not what they came from. He wasn't ready to give it to her yet. Not until she was fully ready to receive it, on her own terms, in her own time. 2 months after the scandal, Naomi finally made the hardest decision of her life, and it had nothing to do with Daniel. She quit her job, not because Daniel asked her to. He never once asked. She quit because, sitting with Richard's old recipe cards one quiet Sunday afternoon, something inside her finally clicked into place. The dream she'd shared with Daniel that stormy night by candlelight, months earlier, about a little bakery with yellow curtains, was no longer just a fantasy she kept locked away for survival. It was something she could actually choose now. She used her own savings, carefully, stubbornly refusing every offer Daniel made to fund it outright, to lease a small storefront in town, 3 blocks from the estate. Daniel respected her wishes completely, though he quietly, without her knowing, made sure the landlord gave her the fairest possible lease terms and handled the permits through his lawyer at no cost, letting her believe she'd navigated the bureaucracy herself. It wasn't about controlling her success. It was about clearing obstacles without ever taking credit for her victory. She named the bakery Yellow Door, in honor of the dream she'd once whispered to a stranger in a blackout, never imagining he'd remember every word. The opening morning was modest, a handful of curious neighbors, the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls drifting onto the sidewalk, Naomi in a simple apron instead of a maid's uniform for the first time in 4 years. Richard Whitmore showed up personally, buying 24 pastries and telling anyone who'd listen that this was the best bakery in the state. Daniel came too, standing quietly at the back of the small crowd, watching her laugh and thrive in a space that was entirely, completely her own, not given to her, not rescued into, but built with her own 2 hands. That evening, after the bakery closed, Daniel walked her home along the same tree-lined path they'd walked dozens of times that summer. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and gold. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Not because of what you built today, because of who you've always been, underneath everything this world tried to convince you that you weren't worth." Naomi stopped walking, turning to face him, her eyes glistening. "Do you know what the hardest part of all this has been?" she asked quietly. "Not the scandal. Not the reporters. It's letting myself believe that this, us, isn't going to disappear the moment reality sets back in. That I'm not going to wake up one day and find out I was just a nice detour before you went back to someone who actually belongs in your world." Daniel took both her hands, his voice steady and sure. "Naomi, you never had to earn belonging with me. You already had it, from the very first night you left tea outside my study door, and never once expected anything back. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who wanted something from the Whitmore name. You never wanted anything from it at all. That's not a detour. That's the realest thing I've ever had." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small velvet box he'd been carrying unshown for weeks. He didn't kneel this time. He simply opened it, revealing the delicate antique tiara that had belonged to his mother. Not a diamond ring, not a grand public spectacle, just a quiet, private promise between two people who had already survived the hardest parts of falling in love in the public eye. "This isn't a proposal," he said softly. "Not yet. I know you need time, and I meant what I said outside that cathedral. I'll wait as long as it takes. This is just so you know, whenever you are ready, there's already a place for you in this family. Not because you're marrying into it, because you already are one of us, in every way that matters." Naomi looked down at the tiara, then up at Daniel, then back at the little bakery glowing warm and golden behind them. The life she'd built, the love she'd never expected, both somehow real at exactly the same time. "Ask me again in the spring," she whispered, smiling through tears. "When the bakery's had its first full season. When I know for certain I'm choosing you because I want to, not because everything happened so fast I couldn't think straight." Daniel smiled, the first truly unguarded smile the tabloids had never once managed to capture. "Spring it is," he said. "I've waited this long. I can wait for the flowers too." Spring came slower than either of them expected, and it brought one final twist neither of them saw coming. The bakery flourished through the winter, word spreading not just because of Naomi's story, but because her cinnamon rolls were, according to the local paper, worth the scandal all on their own. She hired her first employee in February, a young single mother from town who reminded Naomi painfully of her own mother's struggles years earlier, and found a quiet joy in giving someone else the kind of chance she herself had once desperately needed. Daniel, meanwhile, had taken over full leadership of Whitmore Shipping as his father began easing into retirement. He ran the company differently than his father ever had, insisting on fair wages for dock workers, funding scholarship programs for employees' children, quietly restructuring bonus systems so success trickled further down than just the executive floor. Reporters called it the Whitmore Reformation. Daniel called it just doing what should have been done a long time ago. But in early March, a letter arrived at the estate that threatened to unravel the fragile peace they'd built. It was from Vanessa. Living quietly in Europe, she wrote requesting a private meeting with Daniel. Not for reconciliation, she insisted, but for closure. Against Richard's cautious advice, Daniel agreed, curious and admittedly, still carrying some unresolved guilt over how publicly the engagement had ended, regardless of what her family had done. They met in a quiet cafe in town. Vanessa looked different, humbler, stripped of the polish and performance that once defined her. Her father's political career was over. Her family's fortune had been mostly seized in the fraud settlement. She'd spent the winter, she admitted, doing something she'd never done before, actually reflecting on who she'd become. "I'm not here to ask you to take me back," she said quietly, staring into her coffee. "I know that ship sailed the moment you walked past me in that cathedral. I just needed you to know I understand now why you did it. I watched her save a man's life that night, and all I could think about was how it made me look bad. That's who I was, Daniel. That's genuinely who I was." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "What are you now?" Vanessa gave a small, sad laugh. "Working on it. Actually working, for the first time in my life, a real job, nothing my father arranged. It's humbling, but it's honest." She looked up at him. "I hope she makes you happy. Genuinely. I think, in some strange way, you two deserve each other in the best possible sense." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, on either side. But it was closure, clean, honest, human. Daniel left that cafe feeling lighter than he had in months, finally free of the last shadow the wedding scandal had cast over his life. He told Naomi everything that evening, refusing to keep even a small secret from her, and she listened without jealousy, only quiet understanding. Everyone deserves a second chance to figure out who they actually are, she said simply. Even her. That was, Daniel realized in that moment, exactly why he loved her. Not because she was perfect, because her heart had room for grace even toward the people who'd once tried to erase her. The following week, the bakery's yellow curtains fluttered in the first true warm breeze of spring. Naomi stood outside sweeping the sidewalk when Daniel approached, hands in his pockets, a familiar nervous energy in his eyes she hadn't seen since the cathedral. "It's spring," he said simply. Naomi set down the broom slowly, her heart already racing. "It is." And then, right there on the sidewalk outside a little bakery with yellow curtains, the billionaire finally got his answer. Daniel didn't kneel with grand theatrics this time. There were no cameras, no cathedral, no 300 watching guests. Just the late afternoon sun, the smell of fresh bread drifting through an open door, and 4 years of small, quiet moments finally arriving at their destination. "I promised you spring," he said, pulling the small velvet box from his coat pocket once more. "I promised I'd wait until the bakery had its first full season, until you knew, really knew, that choosing me was something you wanted, not something that swept you up in chaos. So, I'm asking now, with nothing but the truth behind it, Naomi Carter, will you marry me?" Naomi looked at this man, who had walked away from an empire's expectations for her, who had knelt on a cathedral floor in front of the entire world, who had washed dishes badly and waited patiently and never once, not for a single day, made her feel like she owed him anything for loving her, and she felt the last locked door in her heart swing open completely. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, laughing through tears. "Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes." He slid his mother's tiara gently onto her head, right there on the sidewalk, flowers still dusting her apron, and kissed her the way people only kiss in stories that are somehow, impossibly, also true. Word of their engagement spread quickly, but this time, there was no scandal attached to it, only warmth. The wedding, when it finally happened 6 months later, was small and intentional, held not in a grand cathedral but in the garden behind the estate, under strings of soft lights, with Naomi's mother standing proudly in the front row beside Richard Whitmore, who had, by then, become the grandfather figure Naomi's own children would one day adore. Vanessa sent a card. No return address. Just 4 words. "I hope you're happy." Naomi kept it, oddly, in a drawer at the bakery, a small reminder that people can change, that stories can end without villains, only people who found their way to who they were always meant to be. The Yellow Door Bakery is still open today, run now by Naomi and that same young employee she once mentored, who has since become her business partner. Daniel still shows up most evenings, still terrible at washing dishes, still hopelessly in love with a woman he once found humming quietly by candlelight during a blackout that changed both their lives forever. And so, friend, here's what this story really teaches us. The world will often try to convince you that your worth is measured by your title, your paycheck, or your last name. But real character, the kind that saves lives with steady hands, the kind that stays kind even when no one's watching, that is the only crown that has ever truly mattered. Love doesn't check your resume before it chooses you. It simply recognizes something real, and it holds on. If this story touched your heart even a little today, do something for me, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. Subscribe if you're new here, because we've got so many more emotional, true-to-life stories waiting for you. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that good things still happen to good people, share this with them today. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.